Hello, I'm Dr. Amanda Damiano. I'm an assistant professor of communication at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Today, I will be talking to you about my research project entitled In Your Face, American Perceptions of Face Coverings Using a Politeness Theory Framework. Mask mandates have become very customary in the United States over the last 2 years. We've seen a number of public establishments, from restaurants to grocery stores to shopping centers, implement a mask mandate requirement. In recent months, we have seen a waning of these mandates. However, mandates still exist at a number of public locations, including schools, nursing homes, senior centers, as well as traveling on mass transit, such as airports, trains, and subways. In the United States, masks have remained a contentious issue. Despite research from the CDC that says masks have demonstrated science illustrating their effectiveness, there are still a number of people who feel that masks are detrimental. Verbal disagreements and physical altercations have transpired as a result in grocery and retail stores, at convenience stations, and in restaurants, as well as on commercial airlines, in schools, and at daycare centers. Those who protest masks have various reasons. Some say that masks are not effective and they may be detrimental to one's health. Some who have concerns with the government telling them what to do, who feel that their freedom of choice is being stifled. To those who believe that children are being abused having to wear a mask throughout their school day. This ties in communication theory related to politeness. As a result of these disagreements, some that have been physical, some that have verbal disagreements, many stretch the gamut from being uncivil, impolite, to downright dangerous. This goes back to the 1978 study by Brown and Levinson, who looked at politeness and how it functions in interactions. They say through the idea of face, interactants have an interest in maintaining one of two possible types. The first being positive face, which looks at good, consistent images people have of themselves and their need to get approval from others. The second type being negative face, which refers to people's claim to territories, personal preserves, and rights to non-distraction. Positive politeness, as well as negative politeness, can be used to express face-threatening acts, as well as to satisfy an interactant's face, regardless of whether the face-threatening act or the FTA occurred or not. Taken further, Brown and Levinson said that when committing a face-threatening act, politeness can be demonstrated in a number of options, specifically 5 ways. The first is to say it directly and bluntly, or bald on record. The second, to say it on record with positive face redress, which means doing the face-threatening act with various appeals to positive face. The next being on record with negative face redress, in which the face-threatening act is used to minimize disrespect or intrusion. The next being say it off record, which avoids literally saying the face-threatening act and instead just hinting at reasons for wanting to say something. The final option is not doing the face-threatening act whatsoever. Looking at these 5 options, they form a continuum from most face-threatening, which is the first, bald on record, to least face-threatening, not doing the face-threatening act at all, the final option. Taking all of this into consideration, the purpose of this study is to look at perceptions of masks. Throughout this study, the phrase face coverings is used because there are a number of different articles that people can use to cover their face to mitigate exposure to the COVID-19 virus. In addition to this being medical masks like KN95, N95 masks, to surgical masks, to cloth masks, to even things like neck gaiters or bandanas. Through this study, politeness and possible connections to political affiliation will also be reviewed. Politeness strategies will be analyzed to determine which ones, if any, are useful to call someone out for not wearing a mask. 5 research questions were proposed in this study. The first, looking at the perceptions of face coverings. The second, looking at how those who don't wear face coverings are perceived. The third, focusing on whether or not a face covering is considered a political statement. The fourth, focusing on politeness strategies, and if any, which ones are most effective for calling someone out for not wearing one. And finally, whether or not a face covering is considered to be polite. A mixed method study was employed. The first phase of the study was an online survey. This quantitative aspect was later combined with a quantitative content analysis to be discussed momentarily. In terms of the online survey, a total of 150 college students were surveyed. Of the participants, it was a very homogeneous group, with nearly 91% of the participants identifying as white, over 81% of the participants identifying as female, and the average age was nearly 21. From preliminary research, a number of face mask perception scales were examined, specifically one from Howard 2020. Nevertheless, that was taken merely as preliminary research, and in this study, the measures that were utilized were exploratory and not based on previously used scales. Certainly, this is a topic that is developing momentarily, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year. As a result, it did take on an exploratory function. To ensure that these measures were something that could be properly used in the study, a factor analysis was conducted, which showed only one factor. Also, similar items were grouped together and tested for reliability. As a result, all estimates were low, and we were able to proceed with the study. The measures that we focused on specifically were perceptions of those who wear face coverings, those who don't wear face coverings, politeness, what it says about wearing a mask versus what it says about saying something to someone who is or is not wearing a mask, political affiliation, how one's political leanings may or may not play a role when it comes to the utilization of face masks, and then politeness strategies, specifically what to say to someone if there is a contentious situation where some folks are masked up and others are not. As stated, the second part of this methodology involved a content analysis. The content analysis specifically utilized tweets from the social media platform Twitter. 2 coders looked at the tweets, and as a result, intercoder reliability was achieved. All of the tweets came from a 30-day period from January 7th, 2022 through February 5th, 2022. This timeframe was chosen for a number of reasons. Specifically from a pandemic standpoint, this is when the Omicron variant was spreading rapidly throughout the United States. Numbers were increasing exponentially, and mask mandates were being reintroduced at the local, state, and federal levels. Also, this 30-day period was advantageous from a holiday standpoint. Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, all of these holidays fell during that 30-day period. These holidays are also known as occasions where people get together, where people celebrate, where people are in close proximity together. So as a result, it was important to see how that would play a role in people's perceptions related to wearing a face mask or maybe not wearing a face mask. From our tweets, the categories we looked at were specifically sender, who was posting about these tweets. Was it a government organization? Was it a media organization? Or was it a private citizen? The sentiment of the tweets, were they positive, were they negative, or were they neutral in tone? And politeness. Specifically, how was politeness introduced in the conversation within these tweets? You'll see what's listed are the 7 categories that were used to specifically code politeness. This was based on pre-testing, first looking at the tweets, our sample, and determining what were some of the emerging themes. A 0 was coded for tweets that didn't mention politeness at all. Then the majority of these falling under the umbrella of yes. Politeness was used, and specifically, someone said, it is polite to wear a mask. People are too polite to call someone out for not wearing a mask. There can be a polite resistance against wearing masks, or other. Sentiment related to privacy that didn't fit into the 3 established categories. Yes, I won't be polite and wear a mask. Yes, polite society is frustrating. And 7, there is nothing polite about wearing a mask. So certainly the politeness references, some saying that it's polite to, of course, use a face covering, others being opposed to that, saying polite resistance was something that they were practicing. The data specifically from Twitter was gathered using the social media listening software known as Salesforce Social Studio. It allowed us to set up a topic profile using the keywords mask and polite during the 30-day period. The search found a total of 1,103 tweets that contained the words mask and polite. What we see here is a word cloud looking at top words that were appearing in the tweets, specifically using the words mask and polite. Those are, of course, the most dominant. Those are the largest here because they were appearing most frequently in the conversations. Then we see, depending on the size, that's how frequently they were appearing in tweets repeatedly. So some of these words related to respiratory, rude, pandemic, seem to have equal numbers of frequencies, whereas smaller size words such as sign, tops, response, mandates were appearing, but not quite as often as some of the words listed in this cloud. They're a little bit bigger. Taking a closer look at the Salesforce Social Studio software, we see the information that it provides for us. It gives us a list of influencers, folks who are posting on Twitter using the keywords mask and polite. The number that's listed next to each of these influencers is a clout score, which is totaled out of 100. So the closer the number is to 100, the more influential the person was who was tweeting. It makes sense when we see something like the Cape Cod Times. That, of course, is a public relations tactic being used in Massachusetts, Cape Cod. That is a news media publication. We see media type trend as well. We see peaks and valleys where there were more tweets about the conversations, and of course where the conversation related to mask and politeness tended to taper off a little bit. On the right-hand side, we see the actual breakdown of the feed. We see specific tweeters who are posting content using the words polite and mask, and the words are of course highlighted. We get the clout score listed as well. So this individual had a clout score of 32. And we see a sentiment analysis, which goes hand in hand to the box that we see at the bottom. This is rating the sentiment related to positive, negative, or neutral. So those who were talking about polite and mask, whether that was a good conversation, if so, it got a green smiley face. If it was a negative conversation, it got a red frowny face. When looking at sentiment analysis through a computer program like Salesforce Social Studio, it is somewhat of a slippery slope because we know that artificial intelligence is not apt to handle things like sarcasm. So as a result, although a sentiment was coded using Salesforce Social Studio. We went ahead and did our own sentiment analysis and manually coded those tweets to determine just what the sentiment was, if it was positive, negative, or neutral. We were able to download the data into an Excel spreadsheet, and what's listed here, of course, is the complete data set, which I in turn went and cleaned up and removed any of the extraneous factors we were not looking at. In terms of the results of this study, going to our first research question about perceptions of face coverings, it was found that the survey participants held a slightly positive perception of face coverings. About 65% indicated that they strongly agreed or agreed that they feel safe and protected from colds, flu, and other viruses when wearing a face covering, and they felt less at risk for colds, flu, and other viruses. Only 16.2% strongly disagreed or disagree with those statements. It was also found that survey participants showed high level of personal comfort with face coverings. Specifically, women showed more personal comfort with face coverings than men. To the second research question, looking at those who don't wear face coverings, how they're perceived. The survey sample felt relatively high level of risk in saying something to those non-wearers. Women in particular felt more risks, as well as people who were more religious. They also exhibited a relatively high level of justification for addressing non-mask wearers. To the third research question about wearing a face covering and its connection to politics, the survey participants agreed that a face covering is considered a political statement. Furthermore, those who believe that a face covering is a political statement also perceived masks more positively, indicated more comfort with masks and more personal trends with masks, and less risks to address non-wearers. The fourth research question looked at politeness strategies that could be most effective for calling someone out for not wearing a face covering. From a Friedman test, there was a statistically significant difference in perceived effectiveness of polite strategies. From a Wilcoxon signed rank test, we found that please wear a face covering was a more effective strategy than, excuse me, can you please wear a face covering? I'm sorry, I don't want to bother you, but can you please wear a face covering? And I'm really glad that everyone is wearing a face covering. To the fifth research question revolving face coverings and politeness, looking at the tweets of the 1,057 tweets that were part of the final sample, only 18 or nearly 2% didn't mention politeness, whereas more than 98%, over 1,000 tweets, mention the different types of politeness. The majority of the tweets, nearly 61%, thought it was polite to wear a mask, and a total of nearly 12% said that there can be a polite resistance to wearing face masks. Taken further, a chi-square test showed that tones of the tweets were associated with reference to politeness. Specifically, tweets with neutral tones were more likely to mention that there can be a positive resistance to wearing face masks. However, those tweets that had a negative tone were more likely to mention that it is polite to wear a mask. Reflecting on these results, what was particularly interesting about the survey is that participants held a positive perception of face coverings, but they also thought that they were a political statement and felt high levels of risk in addressing non-mask wearers. Women showed more personal comfort with face coverings. Women felt more risks. People who were more religious felt more risks. Participants who believed that a face covering is a political statement also perceived less risks in addressing non-mask wearers. One final finding from the survey is that participants indicated that directly telling someone to put on a face covering was the most effective strategy to address those who were not masked up. From the content analysis, a major finding is that nearly 61% of participants said that it's polite to wear a face covering. Nevertheless, tweets that were indicating it is polite to wear a face covering also had a strong negative sentiment, which indicates that perhaps those who are wearing face coverings are frustrated by those who are not wearing face coverings. Reflecting further on this study, our hope is that this project provides invaluable data for those in the public health profession, those who own businesses, to those who work in government, to be able to look at their post-pandemic reopening strategy and employ tactics that are going to be most useful to them, but most useful to the public as well. There are limitations to this study. Specifically, the survey sample size is small, and the tweets, although it was a nearly comprehensive look at all of the tweets that came from that 30-day period, it was just a 30-day period, illustrating a very small snapshot in time. Moving forward with this study, there is the opportunity to extend the survey items and to add more measures, particularly from those pre-existing scales like the face mask perception scale. There's also an opportunity to further operationalize more variables and to look at conversations on Twitter that look at politics, political party, as well as mask and polite. For now, I'm grateful for the opportunity to present here at this conference, and I encourage you to reach out to me with any questions. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks so much for your time, and I hope to join you again soon. Please take care.